That abyss basically accounts for, I think on average, about 130 billion worth of dead-end research per year across the entire pharmaceutical biotech sector. We're almost map makers of the molecular biology landscape. They're taking a drug that we helped, get to the market. That's a huge thing for us. We could do something, so we had to do something.
Hi, I'm Tom Guinness, and welcome to the Raising Europe podcast. Here we go behind the scenes with the people building the future of European tech. Today we're joined by Lee Sherlock, the CEO and co-founder of Meta-Flux. If you want to learn how AI is reshaping pharmaceutical drug development, you don't want to miss this. Lee, it's great to have you on the show today. How are you?
Good. Thanks for popping over all the way from Paris into Dublin Dogpatch. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here. So why don't we kick things off? Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your entrepreneurial journey to date?
Yeah, for sure. I suppose mine hasn't been necessarily a straight line. I don't think I started out wanting to be an entrepreneur. I think I envision myself in a white lab coat for the rest of my life, like many kind of young scientists. But I think I started out in Trinity. Like my background is primarily in life sciences, like biochemistry, that type of thing. And once I left my degree, I kind of almost immediately began working in startups, kind of focusing on preclinical drug development for like COPD and cystic fibrosis. So doing a lot of kind of the early stage, like cell modeling right the way up to the animal modeling work. And eventually then I kind of moved over then into small molecule research for oncology. But I think like in both of those kind of like startup environments, it kind of planted a seed in a sense, where like in my spare time, I was doing a bit of research on kind of like the market, patient populations, dynamics, and, them kind of presenting that to groups like Enterprise Ireland. And it kind of, it was the early kind of foundations, I suppose, for what was to come later. So I was doing a lot of work on that. And then at some point I kind of moved into like retroviral delivery systems and kind of how we could use like things like gene therapies for CAR T cells. And then, as time kind of progressed, and I kind of became obsessed with like, the kind of core pillars or the core problems in like biological science. And I think, when I was early in my undergrad, like one of those things was like, protein folding. How the hell does that happen? How does that work? And then Google came along and just absolutely like, dominated that space with things like AlphaFold, and then you had a whole like surge of like tech bio companies then kind of coming on the market. And then another thing that kind of, I suppose, drew my interest was like translatability between biological models, and I think that's kind of where some of the failures and sticking points for me when I was on the preclinical side was happening. As you kind of go from putting a drug into a cell in a dish, like how is that cell responding? But it's very much in isolation. It doesn't really kind of respond how it would in its natural environment. And then it's like the results that you're seeing from that cell, how does that translate into the animal? And then how does that translate into the human? And I really wanted to kind of figure out how we could stress test a lot of those kind of answers and findings, so that we kind of gain more accuracy as we move into the human, but also we do less harm as we move into a clinical trial. That's kind of like the core kind of like driver, I suppose, of Meta-Flux, and the reason why I kind of moved back home and, collaborating with my co-founder, Brendan, to start this thing up. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And, with Meta-Flux, what exactly is the problem that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, it's kind of exactly what I was saying. It's like, we're trying to essentially create disease simulations to aid in translatability between those biological models. So kind of how can we bring more kind of like complex data sets together to essentially stress test a lot of the findings inside of a preclinical setting. So when you generate information around the cell, for example, if you're looking at biomarkers or, trying to validate those, how relevant are they going to be as you move into that clinical trial? Or the kind of drug to receptor interaction, is that going to be as abundant inside of a human model as well as it is inside of your animal model, for example?
Right.
So yeah, we started out basically building out these disease simulations to help preclinical drug developers, bridge their programs from preclinical into clinical.
And so was there a specific moment which, you said to yourself, I have to create something like Meta-Flux? Like, was there an aha moment where it all became clear to you? Or has it just been, sounds like it's been happening over time, that this has kind of evolved into Meta-Flux?
Yeah, I think like we all kind of, like myself and my co-founder, there was different things that kind of happened that compounded itself over time. It was like, it definitely started off as a bit of a side project where it was like evenings and weekends. We were trying to be like, can we play with something? Can we do this thing? And then I remember like my co-founder, he lost his father and I lost my grandfather in like a month space of each other from lung cancer. And I think that kind of became a bit more of a driver, and we kind of became a lot more ambitious in our approach because of that. So that kind of really like solidified us together in a kind of like unified fashion. Like we're going to try solve this thing over here. And I think that night when we were at just, after the funeral, the classic thing, you go for a pint then afterwards, we were kind of chatting and we were like, if we made something or did something that in 10 years' time, when we walk away from this company and one of our friends or one of our family members has, some type of disease or cancer, and there's a drug that they get given that was a byproduct of Meta-Flux's intervention, we can say we did a good thing there. We can kind of sleep better at night and stuff. So I think between myself and my co-founder, we kind of understood that we could do something, so we had to do something. And yeah, it was less of like an aha moment. It was kind of more of we need to try.
Yeah.
That was where it really came from.
That makes a lot of sense. And my condolences. And so it was the feeling of, I guess, the feeling of mortality, which kind of drove this as well.
I think it drives everything, right? Whether you're a rich billionaire that made money in fintech, you always end up moving back towards the life sciences, I think. But yeah, definitely a bit of mortality there. But also, how can we help our friends and families when it kind of comes to that? Because there's, I think, a limited number of options on the table, right? Especially when it comes to cancer, it's like it feels like all you can do is chemo. So yeah, is there anything that we can help, these guys that are really aspirational, with their therapeutic products? How can we help ensure that they get to market? Because I think it's an age-old story now. Maybe I'm rambling,
no.
But it's kind of like an age-old thing where we're like, it takes like 10 years to develop a drug, $2 billion, and you might get a drug to market, and it's like, when you really analyze that, you don't really see it as much. Like, for example, the GLP-1 story, they were discovered in 1983. We figured out that it was going to be useful for diabetes in 1986, and it wasn't approved, I think, until 2006. So unless my maths is wrong, that's 20 years, not 10 years. So it's double and triple the time to get something, as powerful as a GLP-1 onto the market. So like with a story like that, what's kind of happening from kind of inception of the product to actually getting it onto market? So there's a big windy road that's taking place there, and it's kind of like how does Meta-Flux and an in silico version of a product straighten out that road?
Right. So using in silico versions of product, how big is the market opportunity for this? Because pretty much every pharma company is looking at using these tools. Like how do you see the market, and kind of what's your vision for it in the future?
Yeah, like the market itself, it can be difficult to dissect, but I always kind of look at it in terms of like, there's that leap that needs to get made between like preclinical and clinical. And it's like when a drug tries to pass into that, it's kind of called the abyss. So when it tries to make...
Sorry, the abyss is between where and where, for a layman, like myself?
From preclinical into clinical. So when you go from an animal model into the human clinical trial, trying to make that leap is often the abyss, and that's the highest failure rate. And it's kind of like that abyss basically accounts for, I think on average, about 130 billion worth of dead-end research per year across the entire pharmaceutical and biotech sector. Now that accounts for everything from consumables, from salaries, hardware, tech, so it's not everything that we're going to touch for sure. But it's definitely a kind of significant space to operate in. I think our goal is to basically tweak that dial. It's like, how do we kind of like either bring those failure rates firmly into the preclinical and then basically address the kind of aberrations that we might see down the line at the earliest time point. And I think like when you go in and you administer this therapeutic and it causes this adverse side effect, people get kind of worried then. They're like, we can't explain it, we don't know what's causing this, so we're going to put it on the shelf now for the next 20 years. And that's going to be 20 years where people are kind of suffering without that therapeutic. So I think it's a large enough space to operate in. And there's definitely going to be, I think, many players, and just the way that pharmaceuticals kind of tend to operate, there's, unlike kind of fintech and these other areas, there's a limited number of kind of partnerships that you can make. So it won't be kind of, a king of the hill in a sense. It will be kind of like different sections and different kind of land grabs. And I think a lot of AI will, I think what's kind of most interesting now is that there's a bit of a transition from the original idea of like AI in drug development. We're going to solve all drugs and we're going to have fantastic things on the market to, we're actually going to segment this problem into little chunks, and we're going to make technologies to solve that little chunk. And together we will have a massive impact on the ecosystem. So I think there's going to be a synergy that's going to maybe happen over the next few years, which I'm kind of excited to see.
Amazing. Yeah. And so, taking a step back, could you explain to us kind of in plain English, how the product works?
Yeah, it's kind of like, for us, it's kind of like we're almost map makers of the molecular biology landscape. So it's kind of like tracking not only kind of how like a singular kind of village may work, but it's like how those villages, towns all kind of interconnect, and what is the relationship and the networks between all of those things. So how does, so like a group of individuals from Mead interact and influence the individuals in Dublin? And then if you were to go in with a therapeutic or, stick a dome on top of Mead, what is the impact that may have on the entire ecosystem of Ireland, for example? So yeah, we try to basically map out the entire ecosystem from a bird's eye view, and each kind of variable in that ecosystem will be a kind of key player of the molecular biology landscape, and that could range from your genetics to your proteins to your metabolism. So we kind of ingest all of that information, then try feed it back, and then the final phase of that is when you come to me and you're like, okay, well, I want to know if I was to tweak this town and just kind of, scale it up, for example, and make sure that it's functioning better so that we can have a better ecosystem entirely. What are the effects in other regions and accounting for that? And like just to relate that then back to kind of like an actual disease, like if you're kind of developing a therapeutic that is focused solely on the lung, well, what is the effects on the brain, for example? That's a big question that, I think as a community, we haven't been capable of answering that question for a long time. We've always been worried about it in the back of our minds, but it's dead in the back of our minds. And I think with technologies like this, it's kind of bringing that question to the forefront and allowing us to answer it with a certain level of conviction. So that's an exciting space to be in. Yeah. Does that make sense?
That was a great explanation. Apart from, for some of our listeners who don't know where Meath is, it's a very small town.
It's a very small town,
outside of Dublin in County Meath, but a lovely place, but it's a place in Ireland.
But to kind of bring that back to the science, it's like, it may not be like in comparison to Belfast, Dublin, Cork, like they're the big hubs, they're the things that are very well known, very well understood. But when you're going after an undruggable space or like something that hasn't been well studied before, you need to understand the globalized impact of what it is that you're doing when you interfere with it. So that's kind of firmly where we're operating in.
Amazing. And when it comes to, your MVP, how did you build your MVP and where's the product in comparison today?
Yeah, obviously, like everyone's MVP, it's very scrappy.
Yeah,
it's very scrappy. I think it was very much like an iterative process for sure. Every time that myself and Brendan kind of like built something, we would essentially just give it out for free. To like universities, we were like collaborating with Trinity College, for example, across the way, and we were just like, here, take it, use it, try to figure out what if it adds value to, the data sets that you're working on, and, can we use that information to basically understand more about our technology and basically, increase what the product is capable of doing. So we kind of got to a point then where we were like able to help with like, sepsis modeling and kind of understanding the different kind of molecular pathways that may differentiate things like, bacterially induced sepsis, virally induced sepsis, or surgically induced sepsis. And then that kind of relates back to then like, okay, well, we have a product that is going to help, with virally induced sepsis. Can we kind of track this over an extended period of time? And that was kind of like the earliest like aha moment of like, oh, our technology works.
Yeah.
And then we kind of kept building from there. And then it was kind of like maybe at the beginning of 2025 where we decided to fully commercialize those models that we essentially built out. So I think now we've kind of looked more so to building models that are a little bit more agnostic. So instead of, building something for a very specific use case, it may be overfit to that data set. So how do we build something that is a little bit more in tune with fundamental biology, and therefore, when you bring in the disease data set, it can kind of adapt to that and be kind of reflective more so. Whereas like, I think in the earlier days, a lot of people, including ourselves, were definitely kind of like honing in on a very specific subtype of oncology, for example, building a model towards that. And it's great inside of that space. But then when you try kind of like zoom back out and maybe throw in like a pancreatic cancer, the model will completely drop off. So I think now we've done a very good job of building agnostic technologies that are applicable to a broader range. So now we're being deployed across oncology, particularly things like lung cancer, pancreatic, breast, and also neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, and some aspirations then for kind of more immunology-based models as well to come down the line. So, yeah.
Amazing! Wow,
yeah.
A lot of progress since your open models at the beginning.
Yeah. A lot of sleepless nights. I'm trying to figure out what's going on, but we're getting there.
So going more into the product approval process, how did you find getting through regulatory approvals, and where are you on that journey?
Yeah, I think like it's kind of interesting because we're kind of. It's kind of interesting because that's like an ongoing process, I think, from like even the EU and the FDA. I think the first kind of look that the EU has maybe taken is kind of more so, AI as a diagnostic, and we've always kind of firmly set in the position where we're not a diagnostic. We don't want to interfere with clinical trials. I think there's people out there that know a lot more about clinical trials than I ever will. My background is very much on the preclinical side, and for us, it was more so about enabling the scientists to do what they do at 10x the speed in which they were previously doing it before, and giving them the capability to kind of open up their vision. For me, I always felt like with specific data sets, I had a set of blinkers on. I could only look at several variables at once, and they don't account for that kind of globalized ecosystem, like, how does meat interact with Dublin, that type of thing. It only allows you to kind of like focus in on sub things. So yeah, we're firmly on the preclinical side, and now the FDA is kind of looking at, leveraging technology such as ours to bring forward a new wave of what they're calling NAMs, so essentially alternative methodologies, which can account for things like, organoids, AI can kind of fit into that slot.
Right.
And they're looking at basically removing animal models from things like monoclonal antibody studies on the preclinical side in favor of these alternative methodologies. So there seems to be, a massive kind of, tailwind that's helping us move in a certain direction. So it's definitely the time to be building in this space, for sure. I think there's a lot of adoption. There's a lot of kind of readiness from the market to kind of move in this way.
So how does Meta-Flux differ to the other competitors in the market? There's quite a few, AI-driven drug discovery models out there. What's your unfair advantage that no other competitor has?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, because I think when we all hear AI in drug development, drug discovery, it's such a big bucket. But I think when you kind of get into it, there's like key players that are involved, and I think when you kind of look at the diagram of like the funnel as a drug goes through the process, there's a lot of folks that are firmly, upstream, whether they're helping, develop new drugs, whether that's kind of like, the likes of Profluent, where they're looking at specific proteins and how they fall and how they may interact and be used as a therapeutic. It's very much on the discovery side. And then there's other groups that are very much focused on leveraging things like histology, which is kind of like images of cells, for example, immunofluorescence, and genomic-seq, and then basically marrying those two variables with artificial intelligence to help do target discovery. So it's kind of like you have a group of people that are focused on creating the drug, and you have a group of people that are focused on discovering what the drug is going to interact with. And then you've a totally different bucket, which we sit in, which is kind of like the downstream kind of prediction element of it and kind of like enablement of your programs. That's where we fit. So there's a lot of really cool groups out there, like, Axiom and Cytoreason, and Axiom are very much focused on like the animal model stuff. So how do we reduce toxicity? And for us, it's again mainly focusing on that kind of like multi-omic systems level biology and really generating like causal AI, and being able to help scientists basically, pinpoint the exact pathway in which a drug is basically leveraging to interfere with this particular disease, but then also pinpointing where that drug is maybe going astray. Is it interacting with, different kind of, going back to that analogy, different counties or different cities that it shouldn't be interacting with, or we didn't necessarily foresee that before. So yeah, it's very much around the holistic modeling of that. And then you can kind of mine that then to kind of validate a lot of what the other people are doing in the space. So, the guys that are firmly upstream that are discovering those targets, for example, with our simulations, you can kind of stress test that, like, can we confirm and validate that target, but also can we basically confirm that it's, interacting with a bunch of different targets as well at the same time. Yeah.
Amazing. So who's using your product, and who's your ideal customer profile?
Yeah, I think for us at this kind of early stage, we love kind of interacting with a lot of the early stage biotechs. So folks that are, they have a few assets in their pipeline, they have a kind of small team, and we kind of serve as a bit of an extension of their kind of like computational biology arm, a lot of bioinformatics and computational biology, and we kind of serve as that function for those guys. So yeah, very much in the kind of biotech space. And, we're, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we're being deployed now across oncology and neurodegenerative disorders. So our most recent announcement then was with Mercury Bio, who's an American-based biotech, and they're firmly positioning themselves in the kind of neurodegenerative space, so going after things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And they have a really phenomenal technology where they're able to actually get those drugs across the blood-brain barrier and into the brain.
Wow.
So, yeah, incredible. And this has been a big issue for the community for such a long time. It's like, you can have a phenomenal drug that, again, in the cell model, when you're growing these neurons, this drug very clearly interacts with the neuron, and it induces the response that you would like to see to kind of undo some of those symptoms that we're observing inside of a clinical model. But when they put it inside of a human, it basically doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. And instead it sits across the other side, and it basically builds up, and it may induce like immunogenicity. And it's like, it's not a toxic drug, but it just can't cross the barrier successfully to actually interact with its designated target or its kind of core destination point. So these guys have basically solved for a lot of that, and they're looking at kind of getting really cool drugs across the blood-brain barrier. So we're working with those guys to kind of simulate out those kind of like disease and pathways. Yeah.
So yeah, in a competitive market environment, how do you win customers?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's a learning process for us, and I think lately the thing that has been really kind of standing out to us is that there's a certain level of trust that you build with the partners that you're trying to create when you're building out these relationships. And for us, it's always been about like firmly positioning ourselves in terms of like what we can and can't do. And like when we kind of interact with biotechs themselves, we've always kind of been, leading from a space of we can do this, but we cannot do that. So if they come to us with a specific use case and a problem, it's like, I'm sorry, it's not a good point to kind of like interact, but always kind of like helping them and kind of suggesting alternative methodologies or kind of even different organizations. Like I had a group I was talking to actually last week, and they were kind of talking about a specific problem around like knowledge domain and kind of like aggregating that knowledge. I was like, that's not our space, but Causley is fantastic at doing that. And I was like, I know a couple of the guys in there happy to make an introduction. And I think what that kind of brings is a certain element of kind of like, okay, well, these guys are trustworthy. So when it comes to the point in time in which I actually need their particular product and those specific use cases that you brought me through, I'm more likely to kind of come to you. And it's just kind of about holding your hands up and being just a bit of an honest broker and saying, we don't do that. We do this kind of segment of the market, and we do that very, very well. So if you need that, happy to work together. And I think that kind of goes a long way, because I think, traditionally we've been in a market where, there's a lot of folks out there kind of claiming that, AI will do everything and solve everything, but we kind of find out quite quickly that there's a glass ceiling on that, and you kind of encounter that very quickly. So from our point of view, we always want to, under promise and over deliver, and help these guys kind of achieve their goals and aspirations. And again, it relates back to kind of that core value point for us. It's like, in 10 years time, if we can help get a drug to the market and one of our friends or families are kind of suffering from a disease, and they're taking a drug that we helped get to the market, then that's a huge thing for us. And I think a lot of our customers kind of relate to that ambition, because scientists, it's an unforgiving space, biotech. Success rates are, sub-basement. And when you can kind of bond over that, shared love and shared aspiration, everyone's in this game because they want to help people, they want to help patients. They've been directly touched by this, particular disease that they're trying to solve for in a very kind of personal way. So it's about really respecting that and kind of holding that to a certain level and standard, and I think that kind of helps.
Perfect.
So it's to answer your question, I don't think it's a kind of simple go-to-market strategy. I think it's actually kind of more of an interpersonal relationship that you begin to develop, and respecting why they're in this space.
Right, respect and trust.
Yeah,
two of the major things.
Yeah, I think so.
Amazing. So we're here in Dogpatch Labs in Dublin, home city to yourself, and also, where I grew up, pretty much nearby in Kildare. Is the whole team based here in Dublin?
Yeah, so we have one member that's based over in London, but very much the remainder of the team, we're kind of in office, kind of 3 to 4 times a week, and then, I think there's a certain day you need where you kind of just like, I have a backlog of work, I just need to get this done at home. But ultimately, we kind of value a lot of water cooler conversations, and I think everybody on the team, for lack of a better word, is a nerd. We all kind of have our own little side projects, and we're kind of super interested in things. So it's a phenomenal opportunity to kind of come into the office every day and just been like, one of the guys is like, I was up last night and I was thinking about this thing. What do you think? Can we go for lunch? Can we go for a coffee and like chat through it? And you get like, 2 weeks worth of work done inside of a day, rather than going back and forth on email. So yeah, we really value kind of just bringing together a bunch of highly educated people that are super passionate about a space. So yeah, everybody's here. We've made Dogpatch our kind of like technical nucleus, if you will.
Right. And how do you hire the best talent?
Yeah, that's a fun one I think we're encountering at the moment. But again, kind of going back to the overall ambition, I think, of the company is kind of where people tend to align on. Again, it's like, why does a chief scientific officer spend the last 15 years, trying to solve for neurodegenerative disorders? Clearly, there's something that, aligns in your personal life with that North Star, that mission. And I think for us, again, it's about finding people that really kind of vibe with that North Star. And it's kind of like, even our first couple of bioinformaticians and computational biologists, we kind of walk through what it is that we're trying to achieve. they sat back and they were like, after the interview process, and said, we don't think that bioinformatics or computational biology will be the same when we're done with this. We think that like every other bioinformatician that comes after us will have to learn how we approach this problem and how we approach this task. And it's like, for them, that's like, we're leaving our mark on the world. And I think, aligning ourselves with that ultimate aspiration is where kind of, the talent comes in. They really buy into the North Star.
Yeah. Right, the mission-based hiring.
Yeah.
Amazing. So we take a step back and translate all of this into euros and cents, or dollars and cents, whatever you like. Could you tell us a little bit about the unit economics of the business, and also how many customers do you have today?
Yeah, so we started off with pilots, and then we converted 2 of those into 2 multi-year long contracts. So the goal is that we kind of emulate a lot of what pharmaceutical companies kind of interact with in terms of their business model. So it's upfront analytical service, and then which is a fee, and then it's milestone payments then off of value unlock, essentially, is how we've kind of positioned ourselves. And I think that really kind of vibes quite well with the biotechs themselves, because they can very clearly see, okay, well, we use this kind of model and these data to, unlock the next level and the next step. And that's a very clear value proposition for them. So there's a lot more buy-in from that perspective. So that's how we've always interacted and how we continue for the next while.
So aware that you've been in multiple accelerator programs, and you've also raised 1.8 million in your pre-seed round late last year. How did you find both the accelerator programs and then also the pre-seed funding?
Yeah, I think the pre-seed funding is an interesting one, because like myself and Brendan kind of made a bit of an executive decision where we were definitely trying to, attract angels that would be quite advantageous in terms of the knowledge base and execution of this particular product, and how do we get this thing to market and all of those things. So we were very kind of conscious in terms of who we wanted to kind of participate in the round. So we definitely went after angels that have been in the pharmaceutical space, or have been around or building AI for extended periods of time. So yeah, we made a decision to go after those highly educated people. And for us, what that kind of meant was we kind of knew we were going on this high growth trajectory. And it's like, how do we build in stabilizing factors and infrastructure that will stabilize us as we kind of go through that growth curve, or people that we can pick up the phone to and say, really struggling to kind of get my head around this specific problem. Have you seen it before in your past, and how can we overcome that? So yeah, a lot of kind of advisors and mentors and stuff like that. That's kind of who we mainly wanted to go after. And I think that was even just +1 when it comes to even like the Mass Bio program. So we just wrapped up the Mass Bio drive, and that gave us access to a lot of folks where, on a weekly basis, we were able to meet with some of the BD team from Sanofi, the head of, AI and security from Takeda, the head of PKPD research from Merck. And it's like, on a weekly basis, we got to kind of present the technology to them and, take a bit of a battering, but, give them a real look underneath the hood and help us understand where the positioning is and how this can unlock value for them as they begin to use and socialize it internally. So yeah, I think that was of extreme, importance to us. And it being based in Kendall Square in Boston was just like, it was the cherry on top. These are some of the brightest minds in the world when it comes to this specific space. So again, it was all about knowledge capital, whether it came to the Mass Bio program and also the fundraising round. We wanted as much knowledge capital around us as humanly possible.
So what's next for Meta-Flux? Where do you see the business going in the next 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, I think for us, we want to kind of partner across a wide variety of disease verticals. We're in oncology now at the moment. We're in neurodegenerative disorders. There's definitely, a push on the immunology side, the multiple sclerosis side, that we definitely want to partner, enable companies to drive their therapeutics in that way. Like, there's a lot of talk at the moment with potential partners around, latent viruses and viral reservoirs, and like there's very interesting kind of theories that are quite emerging around like Epstein-Barr virus being directly related to you getting multiple sclerosis later on in your life. So how do therapeutics get in there and kind of become preventative? So we really want to enable a lot of that research as it kind of goes on. So that's kind of where my heart is for, the next while, over the next 18 months. And definitely just kind of growing at a really solid team and technology base. And then, we'll look at future fundraising rounds when it kind of comes to it. But ultimately, it's about kind of telling that story. We're at a point now where our technology is really good and it's really robust, and we have a North Star that is very much more so on the simulation side. It's like we want to be able to create these kind of like queryable models to leapfrog 4 to 5 years worth of this preclinical research that would take place. Going back to the GLP-1s, you're going from kind of inception right away to understanding what it actually does and what it's a good fit for. We want to be in that space and helping that work happen almost overnight. So really the next fundraising goal will be to take that North Star, inject the capital, and make it kind of appear here, and just shorten that kind of runway so we can help get those drugs to market a lot faster. Yeah.
Based on your experience to date, what advice would you give to the next wave of founders and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just like embedding yourself in the ecosystem as much as possible. Whatever the problem is, go live in it. That's the most important thing. And, whether that's in dog patching, kind of surrounding yourself by other founders, but also surrounding yourself by your customer base. It's one of the things is like when you go to Boston or Kendall Square, just go sit in a coffee shop and just listen. And you'd be surprised at how much you kind of take in just through osmosis and understand that problem a lot more intimately. So yeah, go live in the problem.
If you weren't a startup founder, what would you be?
Bored.
Yeah.
I think my brain kind of gets away from me a little bit too much. I think I'd end up being a barista.
A barista?
Yeah. Lately I have a weird obsession with coffee. So Keen, one of our bioinformaticians, he is obsessed with coffee. So he's like rigged out a whole coffee machine with like a Pi and Raspberry Pi, and coded it for like pressure and gauging. And upstairs in the office we have Chemexes, so every morning there's a fresh brew. So I think probably would have been barista. Yeah.
Amazing. What are your top 3 films of all time?
Donnie Darko, Interstellar. I love Donnie Darko.
Great film.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so underrated as well. And the third one, I think I gotta go Jurassic Park.
Do you think that's where the interest in biology came in, or from an early age?
I don't even think I associated it with biology at the time, but maybe because like there's genetic modification, there's all this fun stuff going on. But I don't know, maybe I think in my young brain, Jurassic Park maybe painted scientists as the evil people rather than the, trying to do good. I was just obsessed with like, how the hell these creatures ever exist? So that's, yeah.
Well, great choices. What 3 books would you recommend to others?
Yeah, I think for me, the first one would have to be Psychology of Money, because that kind of broke down how I viewed money and kind of what it was fundamentally. So that was like the very first one. And I think the second one then was The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which is not a book by Naval himself, but he's this like awesome angel investor in, I think based out of San Francisco. But he's just been involved in like incredible startups. But he just has a fantastic philosophy and kind of psychology in terms of like how he views like failure. And like there's a lot of, I think as humans, we have the kind of like sunk cost theory where it's like we spend a lot of time on something, so eventually it should work. But he's not afraid to let something go and start again from first principles. And I think those 2 things at a very similar time where I was looking at beginning a startup and also kind of tinkering with this idea of like translatability. It was kind of like, well, I was in the wet lab. I was doing a lot of that kind of preclinical science, and his philosophy around that sunk cost theory and just kind of letting go and trying something different really kind of gave me the encouragement to kind of like let go and actually give this thing my all. So I think if you're kind of tinkering with anything, pairing that idea that you have in the back of your head with someone as kind of inspirational to me as Naval, is always a good idea. And what's actually beautiful about that book is it's a bunch of inserts from a bunch of different people that have worked with Naval. So it's other people talking about what it was like to interact with him. And that's a great legacy to leave behind, right?
Yeah, exactly. Final book?
I don't think I have a final one, but definitely those two.
Amazing. So who's your celebrity lookalike?
I'm not sure I even want to tell the world. Well, not the world, but a select audience. I think I was saying to you before, but I was walking through the city centre at one point, and
This is Dublin city centre.
This Dublin city centre, and a lad that's maybe had a couple of beers with his pals shouted from across the road, "Hey lads, look, sexy Seth Rogen," and I both loved it and hated it at the same time. So yeah, maybe Seth Rogen is the comparable one, unfortunately.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lee. It's been great having you on the show, and wishing you and Meta-Flux all the best in the future. I'm sure big things are ahead.
Hope so. Yeah, touch wood.
I have a quick favor to ask you. Raising Europe is a community-supported channel. If you find that our content has been valuable to you or has helped you in any way, please hit the subscribe button. It's one quick, free, easy way for you to support the channel and help us make our production better each and every week. Thank you so much for joining us on our journey so far. Without you, none of this would be possible.